All right, let's start with your sporting background. What were you doing when you were younger?
I went to school in the UK, and I think like most people, I did a bit of everything. Played rugby, football, and summer in the tennis in the summer. But really, I think my first passion came for martial arts when I was probably around 13, 14 years old. And that just, from that moment on, as soon as I started doing martial arts, I was like hooked. I felt like I found like what I wanted to do. And so that stayed through my teenage years. And then when I was 18, basically as soon as I could, I actually went to China to go and live and studied martial arts over there. And I lived out there for like a year. And that was, I suppose that's kind of like my formative kind of what I wanted to do as a sport. I mean, it's not really a sport as such, but it was what I was doing throughout my teenage years, really.
What was it that attracted you to it so much?
I think looking back, I really enjoyed that ultimately it was like a supportive community that, the group that I found and the people that I was training with, I really looked up to. And it gave me a bit more purpose. I think that I didn't really enjoy school or the academic side of things. And I think I just really found a group of people that I looked up to and found a whole philosophy that I really enjoyed, and so that sent me down that path for quite a few years.
Is that what spurred you to go to China?
Yeah, 100%. It's it's kind of like the birthplace of the style of martial arts that we were doing.
Mhm.
So I always thought, that's where I want to go. When I went out there, I had no intention of coming back either. I just booked a one-way ticket and went over to China.
Okay, cool. How was that experience over there?
Um, it was super intense. I'm not gonna lie.
Right.
I was probably young. Well, I was young, naive about what would happen. I remember just getting off the plane and just trying to get to this. I started off in Beijing, and I just remember going like, what have I done? Like quite far away from home in this place that I couldn't even communicate. I mean, I couldn't communicate with anyone. No one spoke any English. It was also back then. It was just you know this is I'm showing my age a bit. This is like over 20 years ago, around 20 years ago. So you didn't have like a mobile phone, or it wasn't easy to get onto the internet. So you didn't have this now you just pop up Google Translate and do it on the phone, but that just wasn't the case back then. So you really felt like you jumped in the
Yeah.
deep end.
Um, and then so at some point, presumably, you got into CrossFit after that.
Yeah. So after it was actually after the martial arts, I kind of felt I just felt like I wanted some more purpose. And so that kind of led me into a bit more of an academic and a studying route. So I then came back to the UK and started to study osteopathy. And that's what my degree is in. So I got a master's degree in osteopathy. And during that time is when I actually started CrossFit. And this is like back in the early days of CrossFit, like 2007, 2008. And CrossFit back then is very different to what CrossFit is now. There was one gym in London at the time, but it was quite far away from where we were studying. And so myself and a friend, CrossFit for us was like you run some laps in a park and then do 21 kettlebell swings, and that was like your CrossFit session. And that's really actually that kind of transition through CrossFit is what shaped a lot of my career up till now.
Yeah. Were you a good CrossFit athlete yourself?
Um, I got to like what was like European regional level.
Right.
Um, so I think relatively I was okay. I was never at the level where I could arrive to the games.
Mhm.
But I love training, I love competing. And I probably lacked the strength to be able to kind of take it to that level of the games.
Okay. And so, like, really, you're known for your CrossFit coaching. So, how did you get into the coaching side of things?
So, because CrossFit back then as well, it was such a new sport. So if anyone puts in CrossFit Games 2007, 2008, and you just watch how people move, you know, how people are lifting, how people are doing ring muscle ups. I mean, you look at it now and go, wow, what was even happening?
Yeah.
And so I think a part of it, we were all learning at the same time. When I started, they were just kipping pull-ups. There wasn't such a thing as a butterfly pull-up. People had no idea about Olympic lifting. So we'd go to Bethnal Green Weightlifting Club in this place in London to learn more about the technique there. And so really, even through my athletic career, it was kind of like coach athlete. It was more of a mix. We just help everyone out. There wasn't like that much competition amongst the athletes. People are like, have you seen this? Do you want to try and do this? And it was like a learning whilst doing.
Okay. Okay. And so, like, I mean, it's probably cutting a long story short, but can you talk about some of the CrossFit athletes, CrossFit Games athletes that you've worked with,
Yeah.
and
So
stuff, like some of your successes, anything like that?
so in 2014 is when I decided, okay, I'm not going to pursue the athlete thing. That's when I moved to full-time coaching with CrossFit athletes, which I suppose was quite unusual at the time. Um, because there weren't many people doing it. But that's, after that, I've been working with some regional level athletes, which is the stage below the games. And then we started to work with, it was like Sarah Sigmundsdottir and Björgvin in 2015. And, those guys they weren't on the radar. Now, like Sarah, for example, is just a huge name in the sport. But 2015, 2016, we were working together. And that's when Sarah took her two podiums. This is probably the most famous or most well-known CrossFit athlete that I started working with, and that's been a few years now. And then since, I've had the pleasure to work with like quite a lot of European Games athletes that have made it through. So, like Adrian Munville or Gabby Magala, Lucas Esslinger, Jacqueline Dahlstrom. There's like, you know, that's kind of what we've become known for in the space is helping athletes make it through from these regional or now semi-final stages and going through to the games.
Any like special moments or proudest moments that you've got from your coaching career?
Um, you know, we've definitely had like a lot of fun times. It was always just if I think back to some of the early days as well, like in 2015, 2016, like in 2016, for example, we went out to do this games camp and we went out really early. We went out to this place in California called it's called Stockton, which actually has quite like a rough reputation. But we found this like amazing gym. It's such a big gym. It has like running tracks in, and it was more just the energy about, you're with these group of athletes who are pursuing their goal and doing really well. It was just like fun memories and fun times from back in the day.
Cool. Uh, so, in terms of HYROX, I think you had your first HYROX experience at the FIBO event in Cologne
Yeah.
relatively recently. What was your first impressions of it?
I was excited to try and see what it was like, and I absolutely loved it. I think, maybe not the the running part so much, which had deteriorated over the years, but I thought the thing that was really cool is when you're standing there waiting to go, the clock's counting down, you've got this whole group of people there, and you really feel like an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's quite special. I'm not a high level high rocks athlete or anything like that, but I still got the feeling of standing there, lining up, having the clock count down, the music going. I was ready to go. I was hyped up, and I thought it was really cool that they were able to give you that experience as well as thousands of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was really well run. Like, for the judging, for example, you weren't aware for the ski ergs, but then it's all like all of a sudden, it becomes this obvious thing where obviously, the first person gets in and they're going to get to the 1,000 meters first. And so they can come down the line to make sure you've reached level. So I thought everything was really well done. I'd say the hardest, this is just my thing, but the hardest thing is actually knowing how many laps you've done. I was like, I did a pro doubles with a friend, and I was like, dude, how many laps? Like most times, like how many laps have we done? I have no clue. Just running around this thing and
Yeah,
not knowing
yeah,
when to go in.
yeah. I think so, I mean sometimes there's I think that was like a two lapper, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean
I think
some
actually,
some events there's been four, and like so many penalties and mistakes in something like that. But yeah. Um, now, one reason when you were there, I think, was because you're now coaching Mikaela Norman
Yes.
in HYROX. Uh, how did that come about? Just from like your CrossFit contacts, is it?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I know Michaela for actually a long time. She was a high level CrossFit athlete, and I think it was no surprise that she transitioned over to High Rock. She was always known for her conditioning and her engine within the sport. And we'd been, you know, we've always, since we kind of became aware of HYROX, we've been very excited about it and wanted to do something within the space. I think it's exciting for us as well to have a bit of a new challenge. And that's when the conversation with Michaela started. And I think because we'd known each other for so long, she'd been working with someone in the US. Um, and that level, like it's hard to keep communication because of the time difference. So I think that was one thing that helped, that we're on the same time zone. We could communicate. We've known each other for a lot of years. I've known some of her ups and downs. And so there's already a bit of history there that we could build on and then start working towards this, some new goals for her.
Okay. What's your thoughts about moving forward? I mean, obviously, Michaela came in to the sport. I think she broke the world record on her first
Yeah,
race, and
exactly.
she's like one of the fastest we've seen. But obviously, for the past year, really has struggled with health issues for one reason or another. What's your thoughts on what's your priorities for what you need to focus on in, say, the next 6 months with her?
I think with Michaela, from my side for working with Michaela, one of the biggest things is creating health as a priority. Um, at a certain point, like you just can't compete at a high level if you're not healthy. So it's like, okay, how do we build this healthy foundation, this healthy pillar, and then worry about the performance after that? So from my side, and we have like a little team that's helping and building that, but really the goal is to make sure Michaela's healthy, feeling good, and then from there we can kind of worry a bit more about the performance side of things.
Mm-hmm. When I spoke to Michaela on this podcast, she talked about her volume of training. I can't remember what it was. It was either 5 hours or 7 hours a day.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like too much for something like HYROX? I know, like in CrossFit, there are a lot of hours put in because maybe for the technical side. Do you feel like that's like not necessary in HYROX?
It's an interesting discussion. And so, from Michaela's point of view, as we kind of work towards this more healthy foundation, the volume is not helpful for that right now. So, yeah, it's a big focus of us just trying to reduce as much as you know as much as we can in order to make sure she's still training, she's still doing the work that's needed, but it's not so far along that volume spectrum that it can become detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that probably through, as High Rocks continues to develop, there will become different methodologies that creep in. And I think through the nature of it, we might see some athletes that, perform very well off just relatively minimal volume. They, can come into the gym, they have their few hours a day, and actually they can still perform at a very high level. Whereas there will be athletes who, to really reach those like kind of upper ends of their true capacity, that they might be doing like double sessions, relatively high volume, relatively high mileage in order to get there. And I think it's going to be a bit of a journey for the sport as well to evolve and actually see what's needed to be able to become the best high rocks athlete. What's the templates there? I mean, like CrossFit, for example, that even though everyone's doing CrossFit, there's a lot of differences and it's an older sport in the sense, it's been around 20 years, which is young in the sporting world, but there's lots of different practices and principles that different training groups use in order to improve athletes. And so we will probably see the same thing in High Rocks as well.
Mm-hmm. Presumably, you feel competent enough to coach in HYROX. Like it's. I mean, I guess the main difference versus CrossFit is the amount of running. Are you happy programming running?
Yeah, so I think it also depends on the athletes and at what stage we are. And we do this in CrossFit all the time because there are so many disciplines. We will often reach out to specialists if we feel it's needed. So once we're kind of, you know, we look at our goal as a bit like, okay, here we are. We have this athlete and we want to help them become the best they can be. How do we do that, and what are the obstacles to get there? And like this afternoon, we have a couple of our athletes who are on the island are out with a swim coach going through. They'll be working as a swim coach because it kind of falls into that level of expertise. We might adjust and go like, okay, right now we might have just one swim session a week for the games, but actually that swim session may be done with a specialist. With HYROX, as well as the running such an important factor, we've already kind of been seeking out certain run coaches. We have a run coach on the island that we work with that's been very heavily involved with triathlon. He's worked with like Mario Mola and a couple of other of the high level Spanish triathletes to dive into that expertise as well. So we're kind of the thing about CrossFit is you end up in this general idea, and then we tend to reach out to specialists when needed.
Okay. Um, we've seen a few CrossFitters come into HYROX uh, with mixed results, I guess you'd say. But then, like on the YouTube comments of a lot of the videos, you see CrossFitters come in as a top level CrossFitters would smash this competition. Um, what's your opinion in general? Like,
Yeah, so I mean, it won't happen like a top level of CrossFit coming in. I say this with a caveat, some caveats. So I think like Tia Claire Toomey, for example, she's such a phenomenal being. Um, that I think if she were just because of her genetic potential that she has for being an athlete, she could transition to a lot of different sports and do very well. And I would say she could probably do quite well in the HYROX world. The only people who could maybe transition over and kind of reach that elite 15 level are the runners of CrossFit, like an Emily Rolfe, for example, who when they had the 5K at the games, controversial 5K because of the distance. It probably wasn't the total distance 5K, but she was so far ahead of the rest of the female field that you would think if anyone has a chance, it's someone like her.
mhm.
Haley Adams has been known for running, or a Sam Briggs back in the day. Mikaela is one of those who obviously transitioned very well. So there are maybe a couple of outliers at that games level that could kind of sneak into the elite 15, but the majority of the field have no chance of making it to that level right now.
Okay. Um, what's your thoughts on? Like, I feel like CrossFit is um, very experienced. Obviously, like it's an older sport, but in terms of like the movement efficiency, like
Mm.
how what's your feeling on like what you've seen in HYROX on how athletes are attacking the stations in particular? Do you feel like there is a big area of opportunity for improvement for even like a lot of the top guys at the moment, or you look pretty solid?
No, I do think there's a big window of opportunity for just movement efficiency. Tom, like you see it if we take the last station of the wall balls, for example, like even at the World Championships just now, you could argue that your efficiency through the last set of wall balls becomes very important, even in, those it's split by seconds. And therefore, if you're more efficient through that last station, the chances of you claiming a higher finish are going to be better. And movement efficiency is a big factor of that. Um, I think it's a very hard combo becoming a very good runner and a very good squatter. And that's why the wall ball station is quite interesting because you can do very well at running, but then all of a sudden, if you're not a great squatter, it's just slower to do the rep, you struggle with the depth or whatever it may be. So I think there are certain stations that will lend themselves more to becoming like technically proficient, like the farmer's carry, for example, is you're probably going to find less areas to be able to improve an athlete than you would at the wall ball station.
Mhm. Okay. Um, how about like the requirements in HYROX? Like CrossFit is very strength based. Do
Mm.
you do you feel like HYROX that there is a big area of strength in HYROX? Do you feel like people do need to work a lot on their strength to be good at the sport, or do you feel like it's not that important?
Uh, So I would say, well, it's definitely not as important as CrossFit. And that's very clear. I think one thing that's becoming quite interesting is the size of the athlete that's doing well in high rocks. So, they're obviously quick runners, but they're pretty big dudes, big girls who are doing well. And it's because of the station work. They need to be bigger in order to move those loads. So I think it might become that you really need to start getting up to a certain weight in order to do well on the stations and then have good enough running to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it might just become that you need to do strength work in order to maintain some mass, but it's not necessarily like specifically relevant uh, to the stations.
Okay. Okay. And would that be you'd still like do pure strength in terms of like quite low rep ranges, or would you like sort of favor it more towards like muscular endurance and like higher rep ranges for something like high rocks, or you still think like just pure strength then translates to muscular and endurance quite well?
Yeah, so I think I think the pure strength work's important. The one thing I would say is you probably don't need the technical work. Say like if we're looking at from CrossFit, like going into the Olympic lifting, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is that's probably not as needed. Like you can get away with just say squatting and deadlifting, some bench, like the classic lifts will probably give you enough transfer into the sport. And then I do think because it's not a key component of it that having the variance then is important. So having some variance of working at the top end numbers, then also being able to hit like a 10 RM or the higher rep ranges as well.
Okay. You, a lot of people listening to this aren't elites. Is
Mm.
there what are there uh, training differences like when you're training elites of any sport versus like the more regular athletes? Are there any like primary considerations that you think about?
Yes, I mean the big thing for the elites is the amount of time that they can spend in the gym. The time they sleep, the time they recover. And so if you're someone who's wanting to do well at a race, but you're working 8 hours a day, or you've got other responsibilities, you've got kids, a family, whatever it may be, it's just really important not to try and match these elite athletes on volume because they're basically sleeping 10 hours a night and don't have to do much else apart from train. And therefore, I think it's really important that the sessions just become efficient and very close to what you want to be competitive in. So it's like, okay, you've got this hour window. How can I use this time effectively in order to get the most bang for your buck in that 1 hour and not worry about trying to like squeeze in 3 hours of training each day because you've got all these other stresses that are happening.
Okay. Um, I wanted to ask about. I don't know if this is a good question or not, to be honest, but like like periodization through a season, and in CrossFit, especially when you're working with like a games athlete, you are working very much towards the games, and obviously you need to qualify for that. But um, for for an athlete that's not guaranteed to be at the HYROX World Championships,
Hmm.
do you still feel like periodization is important through a season? Would like we're in the off season now. Is that a time for different styles of training to when you get into the season? How long should a season be if you're trying to qualify for the worlds and yeah, all of that?
Yeah, so I do think it starts to come down a little to the style of athlete in terms of what it is they need to work on. So, say an athlete's gone to the worlds and like they look back through the results. And this is the nice thing about high rocks is you have so much data that you can look back through. And they see, for example, like, my running was on point. They'd have been competitive relatively in their category with the running times. Then actually the station work is falling behind.
Mhm.
That can give you an opportunity to then periodize the station work over a certain block to get there better, and not necessarily worry about the running, which the hope is that, or the theory is that you can then reintegrate that back into your training. It's probably naturally at a higher level, and then the station work can then join that, and you start to see that progress. And I think that's like the biggest, or the big difference with CrossFit is, it's unknown and unknowable, and that, like, it's really hard to work and periodize and actually have no idea what you're going to be doing. And then you go to complete opposite of that. In the HYROX, you have this known and knowable, and I think that's also really enjoyable because you can really get specific in what you're doing. Like, how are you transitioning out of the rock zone? Are you spending like seconds grabbing water? Do you grab 2 cups? Is that all organized? There's all these details that can be really refined and honed in and super dialed. Like when you go into a HYROX race, because it's also known and knowable, you can be completely dialed in. Whereas, at the games, like 5 minutes before you go onto the floor, the athletes may not have any idea of what they're doing. And so, you know, you just there's a little bit of hope involved. I mean, obviously you try to be as prepared as possible, but at a certain point, because you just have no idea what's coming, you need to have a bit of luck in that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sort of noticing like the more people I speak to on here, I'm noticing just like differences in approaches to training, but then also like through a season. So, like Hunter, for example, I think very much has off seasons, and then he like looks to peak. Whereas like Ronkovic, who I spoke to recently, feels like he's a little bit more ready to go at any point throughout the year. And even like between those, two of the top guys, it feels like there is a different approach from that perspective.
Yeah, and we have worked. I think this is where the importance, and when you start working with the athletes who really want to specialize and really want to go into this, those differences are really important to acknowledge. That some athletes can just have this like continual progression throughout the year. They get a little bit better at running, they get a little bit better at station work, but they don't see these huge jumps. It's just like
Uh-huh.
small step, small step, small step. And as you say, they're kind of ready. Give me an event next week and they'll perform well. And then you get these athletes who, if they have to do this continual progression, they just kind of get beat down a little bit. And so allowing them to step away and, just do the station work, just do the strength work, but not beat themselves up. They're probably not going to be ready in a week to go out there. But if you give them this period of 6 weeks of building up, they can be ready and then good to go.
Okay. Um, uh, Drug testing was recently introduced at HYROX at the World Championships, and it's a bit more of an established process in the world of CrossFit.
Mm.
Um, do you feel like that's an important step that for HYROX to take? And do you feel like maybe it is like drug use is widespread in HYROX at the moment? Would you expect or not?
Um, so firstly, yes, I think it's super important because it does legitimize the sports and create this equal playing field for everyone. And I think ultimately, as soon as you start putting money involved in the sports, I mean, I can't remember what the prize was. I think it was like $25,000 for first place at the World Championships. So the money starts becoming more significant. Sponsors start getting involved, and unfortunately, people do cheat in sports, and I think it's like naive to go around that. So any way you can counter that kind of cheating with drug testing, I think is really important. Is it involved as much in HYROX? I mean, it's just really hard to know. But unfortunately, just due to the nature of people, sometimes, unfortunately, that there may be people using out there to get better times.
I mean, to be fair, I don't know how much knowledge you've got around this area, but like, do you feel like the testing needs to become more randomized than we're going to test people at the World Championships for it to be effective?
Yeah, so I think that, so the nice thing in HYROX is you've established there's this elite 15 criteria. You're in the elite 15. And so I do think, yes, that, arguably if you entered into that elite 15, then, you kind of enter into this year drug testing where There's off-season testing. It's a bit more randomized. One of the hard things with drug testing and why it's not done more is just so expensive to do. And then, how are they testing? What are they testing for? There's lots, it can kind of end up being quite a deep rabbit hole of how you do the testing, which bodies you use to do the testing. But yeah, I think at least for starting it out as the Elite 15, which is kind of like the top end of the sport right now, being able to test throughout the year randomly would be, I think, a sensible next step.
Okay. Um, Shifting to talk about mindset a little bit, like from the top people that you've worked with in sport versus maybe some other talented athletes that haven't quite made those levels, other than just like physical attributes, is there anything that you've noticed in some of the more successful athletes that you think separates them?
Yeah, I think you need there's definitely something about confidence in the face of adversity that's very important. Um, and just that self-belief, you might be doing bad in a workout, but you just never know how things are going to switch round and change. And in the moment, it's really easy to just go down. You see it with athletes, they lose their demeanor, but ultimately you don't know what's going to happen. One thing I've heard that can become quite common in HYROX is, and you've heard like Hunter speak about this, you saw it at the Worlds where people just walk off the floor if they're not doing well. And I don't think that's a great thing. Like, I don't think it develops like I think there's always something to be learned from going through, from finishing, from having that experience. Um, and I think that's something really important for an athlete to develop. You can't just walking off the floor. Unfortunately, the lesson's kind of lost, or the lesson you have to go a lot deeper than getting through that. And I think I enjoy watching Hunter's vlogs. Like, he's a really funny personality as well, and very I think he really lets you into his life when he's filming them. And he spoke a little bit about that, how he decided to finish in the end because his family were there where usually he'd stopped. But I think in general that, like, going through adversity, even though you don't necessarily want to, you never know what's going to be on the other side. So you're kind of there, and obviously if there's an injury or something like that, but if it's just because you don't want to continue, I think there's kind of something to be learned on the other side of there.
It's interesting, actually. A couple of people I've spoken to that give similar answers to that, like Brent Fikowski, when he was on here, he sort of said like a similar thing, and especially in the world of CrossFit, where let's say you've got whatever 7 workouts in a day, like you can't let, if the first few don't go your way, like let's not to get anything down about it, because like it just might not be your workout, and the next 5 might be like much more suited to you, and you can come good. And I remember asking James Newbury actually about working with Tia and like what separated her, and he said like if she missed a lift or something in the morning like that would only spur her on for the rest of the day. Like she wouldn't let it get her down. It spurred her on, if anything.
And I think at the Worlds, like JK was a perfect example of that.
Mm.
He's now third fittest male HYROX athlete in the world, and I think if you were to watch the race, for example, he was trailing behind, and all of a sudden he's there and taken third place, and I think that's a little bit of that, just willingness to see what happens, because until the finals finished, you have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. Over and above that, is there anything that you coach your athletes on from a mindset perspective when things are getting tough, like in a race like HYROX, when things get particularly tough? Do you help guide them on where their mind should go?
This is actually one of the areas where so yeah, some athletes really do struggle mentally, be it training or the competition floor. And if that's one of the hurdles, then that's kind of a point where we then refer someone off to maybe work with a sports psychologist, or dive a little bit deeper into that mindset. We try to do our best in terms of like focusing on some stuff that they can use, or very basic advice. But ultimately, if it is a roadblock for the athlete, that's point where we go like, okay, no, we think it's time for you to maybe go speak with a sports psychologist or start to work with someone who can undercover a bit more to why that's happening.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Another, I mean, guess kind of mindset question, but in terms of like pushing yourself in training, and maybe this goes back to like Mikaela and her high volume to a certain extent, but how do you find that balance between pushing yourself enough and wanting to do all the work to be better, and then like do too much and not recovering and being fatigued? It feels like it's a very fine line, and maybe it's an art. Like, you got any tips around that area?
Yeah, I do think it's a great question. And I actually think there can be something thinking about but I think there's a lot of depth and layers to that question. Like why do a lot of people get into sports? And I think unfortunately, like for 90% of people, sports is, a great way, it's great for mental health, great for all those things. But then there can be a flip side of that where unfortunately people start going a bit destructive. They constantly look for that, to push themselves, keep digging deeper and keep searching for that feeling of, in like just pushing hard. And so I think the most important thing is to start to develop like a healthy relationship with the training side of things as well. Like there can be so many great benefits from training and just using that. Um, but I also think it's really important not just to keep putting yourself into a hole. And you can do that with volume, with intensity. If you just keep doing too much than you can handle, it's just unfortunately it can lead to troubles down the line.
Okay. Do you work on goal setting with your athletes, or is it more about like the day to day, the process, focusing on that, or do you set high level goals?
Um, so I think there's always, that there is always a path kind of carved out, and with sports, sometimes that can just be very objective. An athlete is on the fringe of making the elite 15. They want to go back, or the games, or wherever that may be. There's kind of this goal there, but we really do try and bring it back down to the process of like, okay, what can we be doing today in order to become better? Or, sometimes there might be side goals, like with Mikaela at the moment, like the focus for us is just building a healthy platform. Like, I believe she has a bigger goal of being able to perform well at the World Championships. But ultimately, that's like kind of not necessarily a focus for us right now. It's like, okay, what can we be doing at the moment in order to make sure we set this healthy foundation? And then, if the steps fall into place as we get closer, maybe we start looking at a bit more of an objective goal like that.
Okay. Okay. From a like a high level of the sport of HYROX, HYROX is obviously a few years behind CrossFit, but it's on a great trajectory. Are there any mistakes that CrossFit made, or anything that they did particularly right that you think HYROX could learn from?
So I believe they've taken like a lot of good points from CrossFit already and doing as well. Like, the community I think is very strong and really nice. And like they say, that feeling of when you go to a HYROX event, you feel like an athlete. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really important. I think probably as you'll hear if you listen to any, for those who follow the CrossFit world, if you listen to any of the stuff recently, like the lack of media or the failing of media, I think has been something's really affected the sport in a negative way and has really stunted its potential growth. Um, and I think for HYROX being able to tell their story and being able to tell their story through athletes is really important. Now you've got these superstars of the sports. You've got Hunter or Megan, whoever it may be, Mikaela, to for the athletes to kind of look up to and use those personalities to tell the story. And I think that's something that, I don't know if I have no idea if it's in the works or not, but something that really can build a strong community and keep people talking about it. I mean, I think HYROX is doing a lot of things right, but that's one thing I I'd be interested to see is like the storytelling of the athletes and really, utilizing the media in that way.
Mhm. That's why I've got my podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And and you see that the one thing I say is like in CrossFit now, for example, there's all these different media. Every athlete has their YouTube channel and whatever it may be. But one thing that was just different is when CrossFit, for example, did their road to the games. So, that's probably the most recent one. But back in the day, they just used to send a camera crew to film Froning. And it was just different. Like Froning obviously has like from Mayhem has like an epic media team. It's one of the best media teams full time. They do a great job. There's just something different about when it came from CrossFit.
Mhm.
And I think that HYROX as well has that ability right now to be like, okay, if we have this centralized media, I think it will really draw the community in on this focused point and take it through. And so yeah, I think there's something special about it happening centrally as well.
Okay.
Not not that your podcast isn't great.
Don't put me out of business.
No, no, no.
um, what's been your best sporting moment through your whole life?
Ooh, this is a good question. I'm there's been a few when I actually competed in Latin America semifinals. Like this is a long time ago, like 2013 or so with the team. And it was just we had to do like redo a workout in order to qualify for the semifinals. And I redid the workout, got a better score, and it was just a really nice feeling being able to kind of recontribute to the team and get them through. So that was a nice memory.
Okay.
But
Team.
I have to dive back into many years ago for some of these questions. I mean,
Yeah.
more recently, it's any time I beat someone in the gym in in a workout, which happens. It doesn't happen very often now.
Take the small wins.
Yeah,
Um, thank you for this. I wanted to ask you. So you sort of run the program. One of the sort of things on the website, actor non verba.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you why you've chosen that, what it means. Yeah.
It kind of when we first started the company and everything, it really represented what we did. We just wanted to go out to the competition floor. We wanted the athletes to do their actions and not have to worry about doing social media or saying all of these things, but really just let their actions speak. And that kind of um, came from that feeling. Like back in the day, we were quite hardcore in the way of our training and what we did. And so there's a little bit of that energy that we still hold today. You do your work and then you go out there and you let it shine on the competition floor. And you shouldn't try to confuse that with putting crazy things up on social media or whatever it may be. And so there's a little bit of homage to that.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, thank you for this. Firstly, is there anything else I should have asked you or we should talk about? And then also, where should people go to find out more about you?
I think it's really, we're just really excited about being part of the HYROX community and being involved in it. I've actually signed up. We signed up to a HYROX in Hamburg in November with one of our games athletes with Moritz,
Okay.
which is going to be really, we every time we see each other right now, it's already started to be competitive. So I don't know if I've put myself in a bit of a hole for this one, but we're just really excited to be a part of it, and it's nice. And then if anyone wants to check us out, they can just we actually now have a HYROX Instagram page. We became like official partner with HYROX as well through the Spanish community. So you just find the program HYROX on Instagram. The program doesn't have an A. There's not the story behind that is we just when we started Instagram, the program was already taken, so we took out the A and we had the Instagram handle. So that's how you find us there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Good luck with everything. Good luck with everything, Mikaela in Hamburg. Good
Yeah.
to talk to you, and yeah, hopefully catch you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.